Sonic Forces, the most confusing Sonic game of all, regarded by some as a good game and by others as one of the worst Sonic games to have ever been produced, considered to have killed the boost gameplay entirely. But today, we are not going to discuss how good the game is. Today, I'll show you the cut content, the betas, the demos, the secrets and the things that you probably didn't know about the game. Most of the stuff covered is already documented on the Sonic Wiki, Sonic Retro, the Cutting Room Floor and Hidden Palace, so this video is for those of you who are too lazy to do the research yourselves. I also want to thank the absolute legend that is the Sonic Forces Facts Twitter account that has provided a lot of the info I'll show you, and all modders and researchers and data miners and everyone that has made this possible. I also recommend checking out Cybershell's bonus videos on Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, as that's where I got the video and title idea from. If you have never watched one of these videos before, I always like to start by covering the cut content first, and then analyze some betas, demos and prototypes, and then end with a little bit of trivia. So let's start by covering the cut content. There exist a lot of graphics in the files that go unused, such as a placeholder picture for theater previews featuring Sonic about to get smashed in the face by rubble from the game's reveal trailer, some sort of faded paper graphic, similar in style to the VR demo splash screen that could be found in the files, which suggests Forces was supposed to have VR at some point, an early version of the new item notification graphic, a temporary texture with stone written on it with a Japanese word for it above, and a weird leftover screenshot of an early version of Sunset Heights, with a ton of differences from what is seen in the final. Firstly, the lighting is much brighter than the final. Most particle effects are missing. Several buildings around the road are different. The bridge is undamaged and seems to be using a placeholder texture. All HUD elements are visible at once and all numbers are at 0, which suggests it was likely just a mock-up at this point, including a gun and everything. And the burst respawn icon is rendered at a different angle from the final. There also exists a unique skybox for Final Judgment that cannot be seen in normal gameplay due to the fact that the stage takes place entirely inside. Talking about skyboxes, a skybox texture from Sonic Lost World can be seen on an early promotional screenshot of Sunset Heights. Later, a different darker texture was used. Also found is a weird unused cube map likely for testing purposes. Interestingly, the image on this cube map seems to be a picture taken at Pixar Animation Studios, as a statue of Pixar's mascot Luxo Jr. can be seen. The PC version contains leftover maps used for the game's cutscenes, some of which are pre-rendered in the same fashion as Sonic Colors' cutscenes, in addition to variants of these maps that appear to be unused entirely, including Eggman's Base, Sunset Heights, the Resistance Base, an unused version of Zavok's pre-fight scene map, Green Hill, Eggman Empire Fortress, and Sunset Heights again, although as seen in the end of the game. On the same note, a huge amount of unused object placement is left in the game's files, with entire object layouts and unused/misplaced objects in final layouts being present. One of the most popular bits of unused content in Forces consists in hacking null space, starting the player further back and locking their Z position, revealing that there was originally going to be a quick step section before the double boost. Also, the Phantom Ruby Cube obstacles don't have their usual effects. Rather than distorting the playfield, changing the object layout and stopping the music, these simply damage Sonic normally. There is also some dialogue in this section that isn't accessible by normal means.
A prison that goes on forever, huh? At least getting sent here taught me something. Nothing beats realizing that you're not alone.
Mortar Canyon was going to be much more difficult and much less automated initially. Some differences include the relative scarcity of rings compared to the rest of the game, interesting camera angles, and the overall challenge. Sunset Heights, Park Avenue and Redgate Bridge were originally intended to be one long stage. The layout lacks a spawn point, so you end up spawning at the origin point of the stage. Considering the overall layout and presence of Redgate Bridge's QTE, the level was more than likely a tag team stage at this point. Some differences include a smaller amount of rings and interesting camera angles in the 2D section, and exclusive usage of the silver machine gun egg pawns. It seems that the stage would have been much longer, and would have gone for around 3 to 4 minutes with the rest of Redgate Bridge's terrain added onto the end as well. There is also an unused double boost section lacking terrain or collision that seems to spiral around and eventually end up at Redgate Bridge's starting point. Sunset Heights has a second object layout from much earlier in development. After about 30 to 40 seconds of play, it stops syncing with the level geometry, so its purpose is anyone's guess at this point. A third layout exists for the stage, which is from after the stages were split up. This layout is extremely strange in that the player never gains control over Sonic at any point. Perhaps the least interesting of the early object layouts so far are the egg gate layouts, with the only notable differences being the triggers for some otherwise unused dialogue at the beginning.
Whew, I needed a good workout after all that rest. I haven't lost my edge.
Luminous Forest's unused layout seems to be very early in development, not containing much at all aside from a slightly more challenging starting area than the final games. 3 object layouts for what appear to be test levels exist, though the associated geometry has yet to be found, as has the collision from the latter two. Interestingly, one of these layouts contains an unused variant of the avatar's grapple point, functioning like the swinging bars from Sonic Generations. Opening up one of the unused layouts in a hex editor shows that there are several unused objects, including an alternate balloon object which would function identically to the balloons in Generations, the dummy spring from Unleashed, Colors and Generations, and 2 unused enemy types, Enemy Gani Gani FV and ENM Poros Red. Gani Gani is crab meat's name in Japan, by the way. Another extremely early layout could also be found. This one in particular doesn't match with any level in the final game at all, and consists only of rings and the more powerful silver egg pawns. Opening the layout in a level editor reveals that this is a very early version of Sunset Heights / Park Avenue. The layout itself seems to be impossible to complete. The Switch version of the Sonic Forces demo has 2 layouts in its files from episode Shadow, these being Enemy Territory and Virtual Reality. Enemy Territory has an incomplete version of the Buzz Bomber spawner and a vastly different object layout for the 2D section, while Virtual Reality borrows most of its object layout from Guardian Rock, with some alterations to fit in with the boost gameplay. It also has 2 cameras for the intro and is a lot shorter than the one used in the final game. Sonic Forces also has some unused abilities for its characters. Unfortunately, most of them aren't actually unused for all characters, but rather each character can take advantage of them, but the stages for them aren't built to accommodate those abilities. While the wall jump is only used by the avatar in Imperial Tower, hacking Sonic into the stage reveals that he can actually use it as well, even though there are no places where he would normally be able to. Likewise, Sonic can also use Shadow's unique homing attack chain if he is hacked into the episode Shadow stages. Similar to modern Sonic's wall jump, hacking classic Sonic into modern Sonic / Avatar levels reveals that he can use rails properly, and rolls on them like he does in Sonic Generations. This is likely just a leftover from that game. The only ability that actually goes unused for all characters is supposedly Chaos Control. Hacking a certain value of Shadow's boost code aside from changing the effect causes an unused sound effect to play, which is presumably for a scrapped Chaos Control. There could also be found some unused models and animations in the files. Stored within one of Zavok's boss files is an unused character model for Zavok. Interestingly, the textures are taken from Sonic Lost World. The model doesn't cast shadows, and the skeleton is different from the Zavok model stored in the actual file used for Zavok's battle, suggesting that this is a leftover from said game. There are some unused terrain models underneath Mortar Canyon which seem to serve no purpose. They have no collision, implying that they were either misplaced or hidden on purpose. Classic Sonic has some unused animations carried over from Sonic Generations and were unused there as well, implying that his model in this game was simply converted to the new formats rather than being rebuilt from scratch. Also left over from Sonic Generations are goal post animations for Dr. Robotnik/Classic Eggman. The egg pawns have an unused seek animation. This was intended to play after the player leaves the enemy search range. Silver has an unused animation featuring him in a damaged pose similar to that of the Infinite intro cutscene. This would more than likely have been used at the end of Luminous Forest, to sync in with the cutscene when Sonic appears. Metal Sonic has several unused animations, likely left over from an earlier version of the boss fight. Some of these are very similar to certain animations that classic Metal Sonic does in Generations. The golems from Capital City have two unused animations for their hands, where they wave around almost in a violent manner. And here are some unused gameplay animations. Something to note is that most of these only work on an older version of the skeleton, used by the radio variants of the characters. However, as the avatar has no radio model, their unused animations are broken. Weirdly enough, Sonic has an unused animation for getting up after being killed, which is strange. The Queen Beaton also has some unused animations. And to finish it off, there are a lot of unused expressions for the radio calls. They are supposed to be blank, angry, sad, happy and surprised expressions, but they do such a terrible job at it that it's no wonder why they go unused in the first place. Along with all of that, there are also some unused behaviors for enemies and objects alike. The Motobugs have an unused jumping behavior. Upon sighting an enemy, they will jump and attempt to land on top of the player. The egg tanks have two unused behaviors. The first is an unused attribute where gravity affects the egg tank's bullets. The other is one that fills the player's boost gauge when destroying the fired projectiles in mid-air. The Volkines have several unused behaviors in the game, which makes sense, seeing as they are only used in one stage, most of the time being used as background elements. There is an unused object intended for Casino Forest that emulates the same function as the rolling thorn balls from Springyard Zone in Sonic 1. There is an unused variant of the rotation blocks from Casino Forest and Chemical Plant, which were intended for the Death Egg stages, likely classic Sonics. There are unused settings in Zavok's boss fight. These include the ability to homing attack Zavok when he is charging at the player in Phase 2, an unused beaton type that charges at the player instantly rather than locking on and then charging, another unused beaton type that remains idle, a super ring object setting, and a chain explosion that goes through the beatons if they are close together. There is an unused parameter for Phase 2 of the final boss that has the option to spawn Volkines alongside egg pawns. Phase 1 of the final boss has a missile launch attack that goes unused. And to wrap the cut content section off, Forces has tons of unused audios within the game files. In particular, a huge amount of scrapped dialogue is present. Most of them don't hint at any particular scrapped story elements nor cut features or stages. If we are to exclude the remaining audio files for a knife that was supposedly going to be used by the avatar, that is, which is weird to say the least. And the supposedly cut sequence from Lost Valley where Sonic would run on a sand waterfall.
Sand waterfalls are great! You can run on them and everything!
Besides that, there are some interesting leftovers, such as hints that Knuckles would give you during the Metal Sonic fight, some lines where Sonic would call the double boost maximum power, earlier versions of the music tracks for episode Shadow, which did actually go used in the PC version until the November 23, 2017 patch, and even Sonic Lost World's 3DS trick sounds. If I covered every single audio, I would be here for hours, so let's just leave it at that. There is also some unused text left in the game files in other languages that reflect lines recorded in English or Japanese that ended up going unused. And that should cover most of the cut content in this game. There is still a lot of it, but most of it isn't that interesting to cover. So now let's get into the betas and trailers. Normally with other games I would cover the prototypes, betas and trailers of said games, but sadly Forces doesn't have any prototypes or betas dumped or documented to cover. So I'll stick to covering the differences between gameplay footage of public demos and trailers and some concept art. The first trailer for Sonic Forces was shown during the March 2017 South by Southwest livestream, where a few differences can be noted. First of all, there is no HUD and none of Sonic's friends inform him during Sunset Heights. This was done for footage purposes, of course. Secondly, an earlier version of the main theme Fist Bump can be heard. It lacks lyrics, instead with the guitar being used, like the trial prototype of SA2 which I covered in the SA2 bonus video, which you should definitely check out by the way, and is just overall unmastered at this point. And that's about it for the South by Southwest version. Later that year, during E3 in June 2017, there was a demo to try out for Sonic Forces. A few differences can be seen in the demo. There are only 3 stages, one for Modern Sonic at Sunset Heights, one for your own custom avatar at Guardian Rock, and one boss fight for Classic Sonic battling Eggman with the Eggmobile and the Egg Dragoon at Green Hill. Each stage number is just called by the character name and then stage. When reaching the goal, there are no sound effects for it. The result screen music sounds pretty different from the final, as it is missing a few instruments. The title screen is a lot different here, as it just has the Sonic Forces logo in a black background, along with the demo version highlighted in yellow. The loading text is in all caps rather than just the first letter being in caps, and the rest being lowercased. And that's about it for the E3 demo. Now let's take a look at the Avatar reveal trailer. I can't believe some of us thought this was supposed to be Bubsy or some shit. Well anyways, the most notable differences between the trailer and the final are in the Avatar UI. At the left bottom portion of the menu, you can see 3 icons. One for the world map, another for the avatar, and the other for the missions. In the final, only the icon for the avatar is shown. The dress-up text was changed to fitting room, and the tone of red behind the clothing is lighter, along with slightly darker tones of red for the borders. There might be some slight differences in other trailers and promotional screenshots, but there are none that I could find at least, except for the fact that the early Sunset Heights screenshots seem to have more fire and smoke. But yeah, that's about it for the trailers and demos. I normally wouldn't look at concept art in this section, but at this point it hasn't even taken up 2 pages from my script, so yeah, let's take a look, shall we? The concept art in this game is very interesting since most of it looks largely different from what is actually seen in the final. Green Hill specifically looks hugely different in the concept art. You can see a rather scary wall surrounded by fences with barbed wire and shit. The whole place just seems to have a darker tone and and look rather rotten and abandoned. This becomes even clearer in this Lost Valley artwork, ignoring the sandworms disgustingly drooling with sand, where the whole place just looks grey instead of green and looks like something bit pieces off of the scenery, probably the worms. Some of the city artworks also look hugely different from how it turned out. It just looks like Spagonia or some other European city, with some designs seemingly very high in a mountain above the clouds, and even mushroom houses. The Eggman Empire Fortress also looks different. It doesn't have the tower like it does in the final, rather just a cone or an island or some shit in the middle, and Eggman's army, instead of being composed of clones and the same 3 types of robots, would be composed of fucking tanks, choppers and soldiers. Damn. Interestingly enough, all of Infinite's concept designs look cool as hell, except for the bull design, just looks weird in my opinion. The initial concept art for the Wii spawns just made them look like generic futuristic weapons, rather than the actual themed weapons we have. The Avatar's concept art has some scrapped species, like foxes, koalas, monkeys, SPO, pigs, and some weird pterodactyl-like species. And to finish it off, I couldn't help but show you these pictures. They've got to be both the scariest and the funniest images I have ever seen. And that's about it for the demos and trailers. Now let's get into the trivia. An entire early Japanese script from January 19th, 2016 was found and released online by Windy. The basic story is the same, and some dialogue made it into the final, but even then it has many differences, so let's take a look at it. According to the script, the original name was Sonic Wars. This is also how the game is called in its files. Since Forces was in development before Sonic Mania was even conceived, the script makes no references to the Phantom Ruby. Instead, there is a piece of technology called the Voltron, which is described as looking like a blue pebble, even though the concept art for it looks mostly like what is seen in the final and not blue at all. The rookie/avatar is referred to as Buddy. A lot of things are better explained, clearer, or make more sense than in the final. Some examples of this include the way Infinite is handled. In the early script, Infinite is handled differently. He's portrayed as more ruthless and mysterious. His form, powers, and motives are left a mystery for nearly half of the game. The beating Sonic receives from Infinite is much more intense. It's implied that Infinite warps space to nearly kill him with a flurry of blows. Infinite is finally shown to the player for the first time when Sonic encounters him in the jungle. Sonic is once again seriously wounded from the encounter. Since this script seems to predate the plans for episode Shadow, Infinite's backstory is different. It's implied that Eggman invented him to test the Voltron. It's clearer that after Infinite's defeat, he's absorbed back into the Voltron, as a beam of light pulls him into its power source, much like Mephiles and the Scepter of Darkness, more on him in a bit. The final game seems to imply that the entire Resistance thinks Sonic is dead, leading to a scene where Knuckles is surprised to find Sonic still alive. In this script, Knuckles confirming Sonic's status is treated more as a confirmation of the obvious. Instead of being banished to space, Sonic was deliberately being held hostage on an asteroid near the Death Egg. Eggman's plan was to humiliate Sonic by conquering the world first and then killing him after his spirit had been broken. Sonic breaking himself out of prison is more obviously a side effect of a larger battle being led by the Resistance to assault the Death Egg, whereas in the final game it seems to happen somewhat at random. The Rookie has a much clearer character arc. Early missions portray the Rookie as cowardly, as they are often anxious and shaking with fear. By meeting and teaming up with Sonic, the Rookie was meant to learn confidence, overcome their fears, and understand the power of teamwork. There is a line to set up that the attack on Sunset Heights is a recent development, explaining why the city is still engulfed in flames and destroyed in the final. Sunset Heights is meant to be the Rookie's first real successful solo mission. The opening of the game could have been different. The first level was Sonic entering a city located inside Green Hill Zone. Venturing into the city, Sonic would find the place swarming with Eggman's robots. It isn't stated if this is the same city as Sunset Heights, and no mention is made of Green Hill turning to sand. When Tails first encounters classic Sonic in the early script, he was meant to hallucinate seeing modern Sonic, before it comes clear he's actually looking at classic Sonic. Orbot and Cubot are barely featured, they only have dialogue in one cutscene. The Death Egg and surrounding asteroids were supposed to resemble Eggman Land from Sonic Unleashed. The final features a more traditional space station setting. SPO mentioned Seaside Hill by name as a location where battles are being fought in Stage 9. Instead of the crab robot attacking the rookie at Guardian Rock, it was meant to be a Death Egg robot piloted by Eggman as part of their distraction plot. In the final game, it suggested that things like Null Space or the Artificial Sun are Eggman's plan. In the early script, they are more obviously just ways that Eggman and Infinite are using the Voltron to attack Sonic in preparation for an even bigger, grander plan, which is never actually detailed. The reactor core housing the energy source for the Voltron is described as resembling Central Dogma from the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. When Eggman merges the Voltron with the colossal Death Egg robot, virtual clones of Mephiles, yes, that Mephiles, were supposed to appear among Eggman's army alongside Shadow, Chaos Zero, Metal Sonic, Zavok, and Infinite. Currently, both Windy's translation of the early script and the full script are available, and the latter includes lines of dialogue that were written but removed. These deleted lines include Silver making fun of Knuckles for his attachment to the mission name Operation Big Wave, Vector berating Tails for not shutting down the Death Egg's defenses during an earlier mission, and Vector and Sonic agreeing that they were making too many food-based Eggman jokes. Lines removed from the script also show that classic Sonic could have been referred to as Alt Sonic at some point. Cocoa Island from Tails' Adventures was also referenced at one point, but was removed since Takashi Iizuka wasn't aware of what it was referencing. And to top it all off, there is a cell in the original Excel document labeled AW, which contained some constructive criticism for Aaron Weber, who managed the Sonic series' Twitter account at the time. The comments all disparage the plot for inconsistencies and continuity errors, and are quite entertaining. Tails defeats Eggman alone in SA1. Why is he suddenly so weak here? Is it just dramatic effect? Tails and Co just let Sonic get captured? Big loophole here. Lol, this line is awful, please remove it. This is referring to Tails' line, I'll be here with you soon, Sonic, during the infamous Tails and Chaos scene. Seems like Sonic Team actually listened to Weber on this one, since it's not in the final. Wait, what? Silver? Why is he here? Let's not call them buddy, sounds childish. Why doesn't Tails remember Generations? We are going in hard and fast, will be the most played line from the game on YouTube out of context. We do this every single time. Generations end, 06 end, SA2 end, all of them. Why? It's referring to how Sonic's friends always cheer him on during the final boss. On the same note, found in the Japanese Switch demo is an unused file called actstgmission.lua with some very interesting differences. It seems to match up with the unused script. There are some alternate locations/stage names, some of which are just code names, which are Prison Satellite instead of Death Egg, Spaceport Marine Base instead of Chemical Plant Network Terminal, Spaceport instead of Chemical Plant Spaceport, Urban Area 01 for Sunset Heights, Urban Area 02 for Park Avenue, and likewise with the rest of the city stages. Oddly, and this could be a mistranslation, the original name for Mystic Jungle Aqua Road was to be Casino Torrent Down. Mystic Jungle Luminous Forest would be called Casino Jungle, and Eggman Empire Fortress would have been called Eggman Imperial Fortress. Lastly, none of classic Sonic stages have any stage-specific names, like Ghost Town for example. The main intention of Sonic Forces was to bring the Sonic series back to its more serious outings since the original introduction of Sonic's modern redesign, as opposed to the more casual and pop-oriented games at the time, starting with Sonic Colors in 2010. The game's art director Miura Yoshitaka stated, "We wanted to achieve not only realism, but also the atmosphere of the design culture that existed in 80s graphics in 3D. In order to make these basic concepts compatible with the look of Sonic Sonic's world, they chose to work on an improved version of the Hedgehog engine previously used for Unleashed and Generations called the Hedgehog Engine 2. Both the game and the Hedgehog Engine 2 were developed at the same time over the course of 3 years, and because of this simultaneous development, the designers went through trial and error trying to adapt to the changing workflow for the first year until the engine was eventually optimized enough to complete production of the game at an easier scale for the smaller number of people working on it at the time. This ultimately resulted in some of the issues we know the game has today. While nowhere near as bad as Sonic 06 or Sonic Boom's productions, Takashi Iizuka has admitted in notes within the insert of the game's soundtrack CD release that the development of Sonic Forces wasn't exactly smooth, stating that there were major changes made to the game during development and that were even times when the project's future was called into question. The titles of numerous trophies are references to past Sonic media. Fashion Unleashed is a reference to Sonic Unleashed. Infinite Possibilities is a synonymous reference to the Sonic Unleashed theme song, Endless Possibility. Mean Egg Machine is a reference to Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Sonic and the Secret Stages is a reference to Sonic and the Secret Rings. Courage in Hand may also be a reference to the Sonic and the Secret Rings main theme, 7 Rings in Hand. Sonic Extreme is a reference to the cancelled Sega Saturn game Sonic Extreme. Reach for the Red Star Rings is a reference to the Sonic Colors theme song Reach for the Stars. Silver Moon Mania may be a reference to Sonic Mania. Sonic Blaster is a reference to Sonic Blast or Sonic 3D Blast. Sonic Jammer is a reference to Sonic Jam. Sonic Battler is a reference to Sonic Battle. Super Sonic Rescue references Super Sonic and the song from Sonic R, Super Sonic Racing. And the episode Shadow trophies are named after Chaos powers that are primarily used by Shadow: Chaos Spear, Chaos Blast, and Chaos Control. At the end of the Aftermath cutscene, Classic Sonic actually reappears next to Tails with the Resistance group. However, it cannot be seen without hacking because the cutscene fades out before it is shown. At this point it feels like a lost memory, but this is the first time that Super Sonic is added to a game as DLC. Not only is that weird, but we were supposed to pay for it as well. Episode Shadow was originally intended to be much longer, with Shadow and Rouge specifically stating dialogue from Sonic Force's looming shadow. Cut content also includes Shadow making comments implying that he was going to fight the Jackal Squad members as a boss fight, such as calling someone a whole horde of chumps, and expressing surprise at them putting up a fight, as well as Shadow questioning whether Rouge was a phantom copy during the virtual reality level due to her giving conflicting statements as to when Omega went AWOL. And that's all I have for this episode. This was a fun episode to make about a game that I feel most people don't really know much about the development. I have made videos like this one for Sonic Heroes, Sonic 06, Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Generations and Sonic Adventure 2, so I recommend checking them out if you want. I also have a Twitter if you want to follow me there, and I would really appreciate if you subscribe if you enjoy my content, as it helps me out a ton. If you have got any ideas of a Sonic game I should cover next, feel free to leave it in the comments down below.